On behalf of our team, I'd like to introduce myself, Lonnie Pfeiffer, Raymond Kwong, who is in the San Diego area, and our presenter today, Emily Ikuta, our staff attorney from the Ontario area. And I'd like to share a little bit about our agency, and then I'll turn it over to Emily. So Disability Rights California was formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We are a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1978. We're federally mandated to provide legal services for people with disabilities. We work on issues such as special education, public benefits, regional center services, housing, employment, and so forth. We have offices in Sacramento, Los Angeles, Bay Area, San Diego, and our smaller offices are in Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. At this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Emily. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. Nice to have you all on this Saturday morning. My name is Emily Ikuta. So just a little introduction to myself. I am a staff attorney at the Legal Advocacy Unit of DRC. And my specific focus is on intellectual and developmental disabilities, IDD for short. And what that means is that a lot of my focus is on access to regional center services, as well as other related matters like avoiding institutionalization. So I actually had, well, my main area of work was where I worked was on actually in the Ontario satellite office, but like a lot of people, now I'm currently working remotely in Orange County, but I provide services and advocacy for clients of regional centers all around the state. So whether it's Inland Regional Center, Golden Gate, one of the regional centers on LA, I am not limited by the locality of a particular regional center. And one thing that's related to the regional center, or which the regional center plays a role, is early start services. So I'm going to be doing my presentation today, both not only on early start, but also the individual family service plan, which is a very important part of the early start program. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead with my presentation. So, and I just realized that little clip out picture is covering up some of the text there. So I'll just read it out. But I just want to give you a bit of context about the California's Early Start program, just kind of like an overview of the basic law, how it came to be, and its purpose. And that will help you to going about and providing some context and clarification as to how this program is run and what the criteria are. So first off, just touching on what the legislation is that created this whole early start, early intervention type program. It was created by the Individual with Disabilities.
Por individuos con discapacidades. Ley federal.
California's version of early intervention is called the Early Start program, and that is this state's version of implementation of the early intervention program. So when I refer to early start, it's pretty much just California's name for early intervention. Sometimes I'll use the words interchangeably, early intervention, early start, but I'm referring to the same thing. So just want to clear up any potential confusion there. So just some basics about the Early Start Intervention Program before I go into detail about how it runs. So this program, it provides early intervention services for infants and toddlers and their families. And by infants and toddlers, I'm referring to those who are younger than 3 years old. So early intervention services are designed to improve that infant or toddler's development during the first critical years of life. And these early start intervention services are purchased or arranged by regional centers or local education agencies or school districts. And I'll go more into kind of like the agency coordination in the next slide. Interagency coordination. So I mentioned in the previous slide that the regional centers are involved as well as the local education agencies. But what does that mean? So the Early Start program is administered by the Department of Developmental Services DDS for short. And if you want to know what DDS is, that's basically the agency that oversees all the regional centers. So every one of those 21 regional centers, they're being monitored by an agency above them called DDS. And then DDS collaborates with the California Department of Education, CDE. DDS is described as the lead agency for Early Start. So while there is this collaboration, DDS is expected to take charge and monitoring how regional centers are implementing the Early Intervention, Early Start program. So they're responsible for, like I said, administration and coordination of early intervention services. DDS oversees the delivery of services through these regional centers. And what that means is that the local regional center is the single point of entry to early intervention services. And oh, by the way, as part of this presentation, I'm also including the very helpful contribution from Moira, who is going to give some additional feedback as to the slides in this presentation. So I'll pass it on to you.
Oh, hello, Moira Allibritton. I'm with the Exceptional Family Resource Center, and my colleague Joe Goyos is also on this call and going to be participating throughout this presentation also. We wanted to just pop in every once in a while as really parents that have gone through this process. And one of the things we wanted you to know locally is that the Exceptional Family Resource Center is one of the points of entry. So we are a point of entry for Early Start. We have a baby line, if you will, and we do that for both Imperial and San Diego counties. Thanks, Emily.
So now that I've given some context about the Early Intervention, Early Start program, how does one become eligible? How does your child become eligible for these Early Start, Early Intervention services? And I'm going to go through that in the following slides. But basically, a child under the age of 3 must meet at least one of the following criteria. They have a developmental disability, that they have established risk conditions, or that there is a high risk of your child having a developmental disability. And I'm going to expand on that in the following slides. So the first, one of the first criteria being, well, not criteria, but one of the factors that could make your child eligible for Early Start is having a developmental disability or some form of a developmental delay. So by developmental delay, what that means is that there is some delay in the following 5 areas. So one of them being cognitive development, the other one being communication development, so expressive and or receptive language. The third is physical and motor development, and that includes vision and hearing. The fourth being social or emotional development, and the fifth being adaptive development. And by developmental delay, what does that mean? How does a delay, to which extent does that delay make it so a person who has a delay in these areas is eligible for early intervention? So that delay is indicated when there is a significant difference between the expected level of development for your child's age and your child's current level of functioning. And then there's actually one of the statutes actually gives a specific percentage. A significant difference they define as a 33% delay in one or more of these following developmental areas. And that determination is going to be made by some kind of qualified personnel, a doctor or some professional who is part of the multidisciplinary team. The multidisciplinary team being, those professionals and also the parents who are involved as the determinations being made whether this developmental delay is present in your child. So the other factor that one could become eligible for Early Start, early intervention is exhibiting established, or if they have exhibit established risk conditions. So just to go clarify, if let's say your child is diagnosed with a condition that has a high probability of leading to a developmental delay, and that's if it's especially if it's a delay that's not evident at the time of diagnosis. So typical examples would be like having a diagnosis of Down syndrome or cerebral palsy. Another thing that's mentioned in the statute is low incidence disability, hearing, vision, severe orthopedic impairment, or a combination of these conditions. So that's like another one factor where your child could be eligible for early start services. And the final one, where one of the factors that could make one eligible, a high risk of having a developmental disability. So what that means is that if your child has a high risk of having a substantial developmental disability due to a combination of medical factors, factors that are diagnosed by some medical professional. And these factors include the following, typically: premature birth, low birth weight, seizures, substance exposure, before birth, accident or illness affecting development. And so it's a combination of these factors that is taken into account on whether your child may be at a high risk of having a developmental disability that should make them eligible for early intervention services. Now that I've gotten through the criteria, what exactly is the process where that determination for early start eligibility begins? Like where does early start basically? So how it works is that there's a referral process, referral for early intervention services. A recommendation must be made by the parents, doctors, or other service provider. The referral, a referral can be made to the regional center or a school district orally or in writing. So for instance, I've had a client where they made a phone call to the school indicating that they wanted to have their child assessed for early start services. And that was what kickstarted the referral process, the time frame for the referral process. That being said, me being an attorney, it's always good to have a paper trail. So we do, while oral is sufficient, we would recommend having something in writing as well. Email sufficient, just to completely have just to really show proof that, like, okay, I made this referral. This is so the time frame starts at the date that I put this in writing. And that referral referral is within 2 working days after, the referral is made within 2 working days after the identification of an infant or a toddler who appears to be in need of early intervention services. One thing I wanted to touch on was because one thing is like, okay, what counts as a referral? And I mentioned in the PowerPoint, the parents, doctors. So there's actually a name for that: primary referral sources. And they include the parents, of course, physicians, hospitals, the school, public health facilities, childcare programs, and basically any other social service agencies or healthcare providers. So what counts as a primary referral that kickstarts this process is pretty broad, and it can include the parents too. So just you expressing an interest and getting that determination made for early start should kickstart that process. And Moira.
I'm happy to just also pipe in that, again, I know Joe's putting in the chat ways that you can reach out directly to EFRC, as we are a point of entry for regional center services for early start. And I would also point out that, as Emily is saying, a parent referral is what it takes to start. A lot of times we run into families that are like, oh, well, we're going to go get a diagnosis first, and then we'll start early intervention. And a lot of times you won't get a diagnosis because the child is so young, that often just to reestablish, you are not responsible for finding someone to diagnose your child. You are only responsible for making that referral and saying, I have a concern. And then let these early intervention systems help to support you and your child through that process. Thanks, Emily.
So how will eligibility for early intervention services be determined? So regional centers and school districts, they're responsible for ensuring that they apply and begin the evaluation process for early intervention. And so there is this assessment procedure to determine whether your child is eligible for early intervention services. And what that involves is basically evaluating your child's level of functioning in the areas of the following: cognitive development, physical and motor development, vision and hearing, communication development, social or emotional development, and adaptive development. These all sound very familiar, I imagine. And they must be conducted in a natural environment. So basically in an environment where it's most comfortable for the family, for the child, usually in the home setting. So that is the process by which that assessment is carried out to determine eligibility. So just continuing on that point about determination for early intervention. Once that referral, so like I mentioned, there was a referral, and once the referral is made, the regional center must conduct the assessment activities, must hold a meeting to determine eligibility, and develop an individualized family service plan, IFSP. So I told you I was going to bring up IFSP eventually. And that has to be done within 45 calendar days of the date of receipt of the referral. So that's what I mean about the whole kickstarting that time frame. And this is important because, as I mentioned in the previous slide, early start intervention services, the whole purpose is to address developmental delay in the critical, crucial early years of life. So time is of the essence. And that means is that the regional centers should err on finding eligibility for early start intervention services because of the importance of the benefit that these services provide at such a young age, before age 3. So so I just want to emphasize that, like, if there's delays or processes where things are not moving along quickly, the law is on your side and pushing for expediency and making sure that if your child does have a delay, that they get those services promptly. So I mentioned before, because it's the regional center, of course, and DDS is the lead agency. But again, which agency is really responsible for ensuring that these services are provided? How does it work with this coordination? So basically, the regional center is responsible for providing or purchasing appropriate services that are, in this case, beyond the responsibilities of the school district. That being said, the regional center is still, even in the early start context, described as the payer of last resort. What that means is now this is something that you hear a lot for those who are eligible for regional center services. I just want to clarify, being eligible for early start is not the same as being eligible for regional center services after age 3. And that's something I'm going to expand on later in this presentation. But when I say, so payer of last resort tends to come up more after age 3 for those who are eligible. But like I said, because of the whole importance of getting early start services to address developmental delay as quickly as possible, that is a tool to really push for the regional center to fill in the gap and provide that service if necessary, if there's a possibility that an early intervention service that could benefit your child could be delayed. But I just want to mention this whole payer of last resort. It generally refers to the requirement that you exhaust other resources, other public agencies providing that service for you. And then once you have gone through and if either that other generic resource is not able to provide that service, or is not appropriate, then you go back to the regional center and be like, okay, I went through these other agencies. I can't get the services I or my child needs. I'm turning to you now as the payer of last resort. Like I said, though, because with Early Start and given the importance of getting access to Early Start services, really, that should really give you really help you in getting the service you need and getting the regional center to cover it if necessary because of the importance of getting it quickly. And now let's tuck in the last point. The regional center is ultimately responsible for providing and or funding services for children under age 3 who may be eligible for services from both the regional center and school district. So I've gone over just in general, the Early Start intervention program, the eligibility, just all the stuff about what it is and how your child can get those services. Now let's go deeper into what happens if you are eligible for early intervention, your child is determined eligible for early intervention. Now we move on to the next important piece, the Individualized Family Service Plan, or IFSP for short. So what is the Individualized Family Service Plan and why is it so important? So it is a service plan, the IFSP, and it is developed once eligibility for Early Start services is determined. So there's a referral, there's the assessment, your child is found eligible, and then the IFSP. And treat the IFSP as like a contract for involving your child from age 0 to 3, between you and your child and the regional center. And this plan, being a service plan, is a breakdown, a roadmap of early intervention services that your child that they will benefit from. So it identifies the services appropriate to meet the needs of your child. And it will also include goals, objectives, and a list of early intervention services mutually agreed to by you and the others in the IFSP team.
And a couple other points. One is that these services are they're really unique. This under 3 Early Start is super unique in terms of where those services occur, that we often hear about people, going here, going there, and the law and the IFSP really do emphasize the opportunity to have services occur in the natural environment. So the natural environment is where the student, the baby or toddler is most comfortable. And also where the family can be involved. So often that includes the family home, which obviously COVID's been a little challenging. It could include if the child is in daycare, that could be a location of services. So really thinking about services often being brought to the family and to the infant toddler. The other thing is that it is a family service plan. And that will all change, both of these things, where the services occur and that it's a family service plan. Those things change when the child turns 3, but just a couple things to emphasize from a parent perspective.
So I mentioned in the previous slide there's a IFSP team, and so in case you're thinking, wait, who's part of that team? Who's this team? Well, here's a breakdown. It's going to be, of course, you as the parent or legal guardian, if that's the case, other family members, if you request it. So you can also add people to that team. It can be an advocate from outside the family, again, if you, the parent, request it. The service coordinator, any professionals who were directly involved in evaluating or assessing your child's needs, including for Early Start. So, the actual doctors or evaluators who did the testing, they are part of that IFSP team. And as well as the service providers, those who will provide the early intervention services for your child or other services that benefits the child or the child's family. Oh, Moira, did you have anything to add?
I think my only comment or caveat would be that sometimes when you have professionals, especially I would say medical doctors, they often will write a report, send it in. You may or may not actually see them at your IFSP meeting, but that doesn't take away from their opinion affecting the team and them being considered a member of the team. But don't go, oh, they're not here, we can't go on. Like, we can take their input and they're busy diagnosing other people.
So what's basically, so you may be wondering, there's this IFSP meeting, but how does it work? What happens at this meeting? So your child's IFSP, it has to include during this process, it has to include the following. So this is like the information that's in that service plan. So that will be your child's present levels of functioning and need. So, where they're at currently, relevant family information, the major results or outcomes expected to be achieved for your child and the family, the specific early intervention services that your child will be receiving, when, where, how much, and how often your child will receive those services, who will pay for the services, the name of the service coordinator, and transition planning, especially if your child is starting to run up and get closer to the age of 3. That last transition part is going to be fairly important. So how is the IFSP developed, and how often is it reviewed, revised? So the multidisciplinary team, or IFSP team, including you, the parent, develops the IFSP from an assessment of the unique needs of your child. The IFSP identifies the services appropriate to meet those needs. That IFSP is evaluated at least once a year, so annually. In addition, a review of the plan is provided to the family typically every 6 months, or it can actually be even more often if it's needed, or if you, the parents, request such a review. So the frequency is also a factor that the family has control of, if necessary. So just continuing on the whole development of the IFSP. The IFSP meetings must be held at places and times convenient for the family of the child, convenient for you, basically. The lead agency, regional center or school district, usually the regional center, must obtain parental consent. And your informed written consent is required to implement the IFSP. So you as the parent play a major role in getting and making sure that this IFSP is being implemented. The responsible agency, again, usually a regional center, must fully explain the IFSP contents, the outcomes and services. So that's your opportunity, they need to be forthcoming and clear about what's in your child's IFSP. And also that's your chance to ask questions, get clarification, really push on what exactly the services are and how it will benefit your child. And they have to answer those questions. Services must be provided as soon as possible. Again, I mentioned the importance of expediency because these services are supposed to benefit during those critical early years of life. So that's something where if you're experiencing some delay or other obstacle to the implementation of early start services, be aware that the law does put pressure on making sure those services are provided as soon as possible. And also, you can revoke your consent at any time.
I was going to just add one little tidbit that Zoom is something that's come into our lives with COVID, and that sometimes it is easier and more expedient to be able to pull a Zoom meeting together. So if you are agreeable to that, that is an option for families. And particularly if your child or a family member that lives with you has some of those compromised immune systems, this is something that you might request. And we do find that sometimes the meeting can be held quicker when people just can attend remotely. And then just dovetailing on something that Emily said, if those services are not starting, and I know we're going to hit this again later, but service coordinator, that is an immediate, it is not happening, keeping them apprised that these services haven't started as predicted. And if you're not getting enough help from your service coordinator, they have a program manager. So there's always someone else that you can bring in to help to create that sense of urgency. Thanks, Emily.
Oh, and before I move on, I just want to bring up that there is, if you yourself want to look up, in addition to this PowerPoint presentation, if you yourself want to look up or find convenient sources of information that breaks down the early start process, one great resource is DDS's website on early start. They actually have a pub specifically on frequently asked questions, FAQ. And basically, they really, all the things that I brought up in this presentation, they do a great job breaking down and giving that information. So I would recommend you accessing that their DDS's resources on early start information, and we will follow up with links and resources on how you can, where you can go to see that information. I believe they also have a Spanish version as well, so we'll double check on that too. So moving on. Oh yes, that's it. Early start, and then like if you look on the bottom, there's a early start fact page. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, great resource. Okay, so yeah, just want to let you know this is what just give you an idea what the web page looks like, where you can find that information. And oh, actually, also each regional center usually has their own like web page or publicly posted information about the early start process. So if and each regional center is that's going to be based on your locality. So if you really want to look up or get more info about early start, then you would go. You can you just determine what your local regional center is, and they should have a. They usually have staff specifically who are focused on early start services. So just letting you know that it's a resource that both DDS and the regional centers should have and should be providing you about the early start process. So sorry about that little tangent there. Moving on, native language rights. So this is touching on not just about the early start process itself, but how it can be, it's supposed to be accessible to people of all in all languages, not just in English. So just to break down what I mean by native language rights. So a native language is defined as basically the language that you as the parent or your child, usually the parent, yeah, it's going to be you, normally uses or prefers. And the regional center, they have an obligation to provide information in a manner that is culturally and linguistically appropriate. What that means is that they need to provide information in your native language. So if your native language is Spanish, then you have a right to information, including information about the early start process in Spanish. On top of that, the actual early intervention process itself, including the assessment, the intake should also include Spanish translation and interpretation of important resources. So the evaluation must be conducted in the native language of the child or the family. And also other important information should be translated in the native language as well. So the IFSP documents and other information about the assessment, the supports, and the services. So just letting you know that you do have that right to get information in your native language that you can understand. So just to further expand on the whole accessing language rights, the regional center also must provide you, well, I already mentioned this, a copy of the IFSP in your native language, unless, and again, this is very likely not going to be something that's going to be an issue, but it is something I want to bring up, unless DDS determines that it would be an undue hardship for the regional center to do so. But I would say don't worry about that latter part, especially if your native language is like a threshold language. I know that Spanish is most definitely one of those threshold languages. That should never become a reason, an undue hardship for the regional center not to provide the IFSP in your native language. You can get a copy of your child's IFSP in your native language. You have a right to get it within a reasonable amount of time, unless again DDS says it is an undue burden on the regional center. But I would say that last part should not I would say very, very rarely would be a factor. So you do have a right to get that translated IFSP within a reasonable amount of time. And then just some final notes on this. Accessing language rights. The regional center must state the client's native language, client as in your child, native language in the IFSP. So make it very clear and upfront that this is what the family's native language is. If the regional center does not document the native language or does not do an intake, assessment, or evaluation or IPP planning that includes translation in native language, you actually have the right to file a complaint. So just letting you know that there is, this isn't just, this isn't an optional thing. They're doing out of the, just doing it because they're nice. This is something they have to do. And you can file a complaint if they fail to provide information in your native language. So I just want to touch on the role of the Regional Center Service Coordinator in this whole early start intervention process. So the coordinator, they of course coordinate all services across agency lines. They may serve as the single point of contact in helping you obtain the services and assistance that your child needs. They develop and review your child's IFSP. They coordinate evaluations and facilitate delivery of available services. They help to seek the appropriate services necessary to benefit the development of each child. So I just want to emphasize that it's it should be based on what is most appropriate and beneficial for your child in terms of their development. And but they also facilitate the development of a transition plan to preschool services. So, and that's another thing I'll touch on, that there is gonna, as your child gets closer to the age of 3, that's when that transition planning process really gets going.
And I'm gonna add, just like as a parent who's been through this a few times, the other thing that regional center service coordinators is kind of a sounding board for you as a parent. If you're experiencing, like, even though you've written an IFSP, if something new happens, they are a great person to be able to bring into the loop. Like, now we have this. Do we need to change the IFSP, or is there another generic resource that you know of, service coordinator, who works with lots of kiddos, that I should be looking for? Is there a good program? Is there, another one of these, as we call them, generic services that are out in the community? Is there a support group? They are a great place to kind of get more resources before you come to Exceptional Family Resource Center. And then just to kind of return or touch back on the native language issue, they are also that person that's responsible ultimately for making sure that if we need a translator or an interpreter, that they are coming in at the right place. So definitely, if you have concerns about understanding, they are that other person that you should be contacting. Thanks, Emily.
So now we're going to touch, now that I've talked about just the early start referral, the assessment, the native language rights, what services can my child get? What are early start services? And I'll expand on that in the next slide. So this is a non-exhaustive list of the examples of the services that could be provided through the Early Start program for the purposes of benefiting or furthering a child's development. So I'm just putting up there for you to see, but examples are like assistive technology, family training, health services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and even services like transportation if necessary. So these are just kind of the examples of services, and you're not limited to the ones on this list. Early intervention are, again, the idea is that it's supposed to benefit your child in their development. I touched on this in a previous slide in that there is still this generic resource requirement, and that ties back to the whole regional centers call themselves the payers of last resort. So just to reiterate one more time, just to really underline what this means, a generic resource is if you're wondering what that is, a generic resource, a generic agency, well, what is that? Why do they keep saying that? It's an agency that receives public funds with a legal responsibility to serve all members of the general public. And what does that mean? It just means any other agency that can pay for the same or similar service as the regional center. The idea being that if that agency can pay for that service or a similar service, you got to go through them first, and then come back to the regional center if that service from a generic if a generic resource is not available, or if they refuse to pay for the service, or if they can't, or if it's not appropriate. So that's what is meant by the regional center being the payer of last resort. And I'm just giving you an example of like the common generic resources, other agencies that can provide services where you may have to exhaust them before turning to the regional center. So the regional center, they're prohibited from purchasing any service that would otherwise be available from, and these are just examples. It's a non-exhaustive list. There could be more. These are the main ones: Medi-Cal, private insurance or healthcare plan, in-home supportive services from the county, IHSS for short, the Department of Rehabilitation, although that really comes up for adults, and a school district. I just want to touch on just that last part, the generic resource, because it included private insurance. And how would that, in what way would that impact your child's ability to access early start services? So early start rules on using private insurance. Regional centers require parents to use private insurance to pay for medical services written into the IFSP. This may include paying deductibles and co-payments, but not paying for an evaluation or assessment of your child. So the actual evaluation and assessment for early start, that's not something where you would have to be forced to go through your own insurance for. What if this process, now let's say, what if this process nonetheless delays my child from getting early start services that they need? And I mentioned this before, the importance of expediency, of moving quickly. The law requires regional centers to allow immediate funding for necessary services. So if even in this process, despite this requirement, there's going to be a delay in your child getting these services, when they're at an age where they absolutely need these services as soon as possible, then that is enough. Then that should that requires the regional centers to immediately fund the service, regardless of whatever restriction they put on. So that's why really emphasizing that the child's need, the infant or toddler's need to get these services ASAP is a way to get those services as soon as possible, regardless of whatever policies or barriers that the regional center usually has on access to those services. Just continuing on this point, an inability to obtain a decision from your private insurer about, whether they approve or deny a claim must not result in a denial or delay of services to your child via the Early Start program. That being said, you must provide copies of health benefit cards. So that could be like your private insurance, your Medi-Cal, your Medicare, whatever applies. Lack of private insurance or other benefits, however, must not be used to negatively impact access or the type of services that your child gets. So early intervention services, basically, they must not be denied or delayed for children of parents who are unable to pay insurance co-payments or deductibles. So just really emphasizing that the importance of getting these services, the whole purpose of Early Start, to get these services as soon as possible without delay and in such a way where potential obstacles shouldn't pose significant hurdles to those services being provided to your child as soon as possible. Now, that being said, let's say, now, I mean, I've talked about things go along smoothly, if things go along as required under the law. Nonetheless, there is still there's still an avenue for you to express complaints or to resolve disputes when and if they come up. as it relates to regional center, or sorry, early start services. So there is a specific early start complaint process. What it involves is you, the parent, filing a complaint with DDS. The complaint must include a description of the violation by the regional center as it relates to the provision of early intervention services. The DDS, again, remember DDS, that's the agency that oversees the regional centers. DDS must receive that complaint within 1 year of the date of that violation by the regional center. Within 60 days after DDS receives the complaint, DDS must investigate and release their written decision on the findings and what kind of corrective actions that the regional center should take. And you can submit your own written and signed statement, or you can actually use a form. DDS conveniently provided a template, and I put the website for you just for that purpose. So that was the complaint process. There's actually even a due process hearing that is an option to resolve disputes regarding early intervention services. So this is to resolve, so you can request a hearing if it means in order to resolve a disagreement between yourself and a regional center or school district involving any matter related to early start. The hearing must be completed within 30 days from the receipt of that hearing request by the Office of Administrative Hearings. So just to give some clarification, OAH, they're the ones who process and resolve these hearings. They will actually have an administrative law judge sit in and hear the arguments from both sides and release a decision. And actually, in comparison to like the regional center appeals process, this is supposed to move faster. Like I said, time is of the essence, and if there's a dispute about an early start service, then there's that much pressure to get it resolved quickly. So that's why there's a 30-day time frame. And that decision from that judge is final but if you disagree or you're unsatisfied with that decision, you actually do have the right to appeal to the superior court of appropriate jurisdiction. So that is so that just letting you know that it doesn't have to end there. You can also appeal to an even higher court if it's something that's you're seriously considering. And below is a link to the whole appeals complaints process for early start. So I'm going to end off touching on transition planning, because I mentioned it before that becomes very important as your child nears the age of 3, and also the possibility of getting regional center services under provisional eligibility. So I'll touch on transition planning first. Transition planning usually starts 6 months before your child's 3rd birthday. 90 days before your child turns 3, the service coordinator must send a referral to the local school district. On top of that, this is usually around the time where the regional center itself may may review records or do an assessment to determine whether your child is eligible for regional center services generally after age 3. And then a requirement as part of this transition process, there's an IFSP meeting where you discuss that transition to preschool services. So that's just a general overview of how that transition planning is conducted, that there is this period where there's a discussion on how your child is going to get the services they need through the school district as they near the age of 3. But before I go on to just the next part, provisional eligibility, I really want to clarify something about early start versus regional center services, because this is something that, not surprisingly, has created a lot of confusion. And for good reason. It's like it's one of those things where it's like, wait, if the regional center and DDS as the lead agency is responsible for making sure my child gets early start services, So, well, I mean, doesn't that mean that my child is also eligible for regional center services, or isn't that the same thing as being eligible generally for regional center services? In fact, no, it's not. But it's completely understandable why it can be confusing. You get a service coordinator, you get a regional center involved. You have the regional center with their own staff specifically assigned just on the administration of early start services. And yet, when your child turns 3, the regional center may make the determination that, oh, yeah, we're ending things here. We found that after doing the assessment, we found your child is not eligible. So our role has ended. and sometimes we have gotten concerns. My parents were like, wait, I thought my child was continued to be eligible for regional center, but then they just kind of cut off after that. So I just want to emphasize that there is the early start where you meet that criteria of having a high risk condition or a high likelihood of leading to a developmental disability, and that's for early start. But once your child turns age 3, that's where they may or may not be eligible for regional center services. And in order to be eligible for regional center services, there is a separate application process. And eligibility for regional center services has its own criteria, specific criteria that is required to be met in order to be eligible long-term for regional center services. So I just want to go over that, just really clarify that. Now, that being said, there has been a recent change with eligibility that has actually expanded the availability of regional center services after age 3 to a larger number of children. There was a change in law, and by change, I mean very recent, like the last year or two, that expanded eligibility, where you're not required to meet all the criteria. So I mentioned before that the regional center, they have like their own list of criteria you have to meet in order to be eligible long-term for regional center services. And when I say long-term, I mean long-term. Once you're eligible for regional center services, you get them for life. So, but there is something called provisional eligibility, where your child could be eligible without actually meeting all the criteria. Instead, only meeting some of that criteria, and that would be sufficient for them to get to be eligible for regional center services. Now, heads up, this does not mean that they're therefore permanently eligible. This is usually the case where, especially with early development, where certain areas or information might be it might be too early to come by. So what happens is that at the age of 3 or 4, your child could be eligible for regional center services. So that means that if they at least meet some of the criteria under provisional eligibility, and that means they have access to all the services from the regional center that any person who's eligible for regional center services would get. But the condition being that once they reach the age of 5, or before the age of 5, they have to be reassessed for standard eligibility. So it's like, okay, you can get these services now, even though you don't meet all the criteria because your child's very young and we're still getting this information. But so for age 3 and 4, you're good. But before your child turns 5, then we're going to reassess again, and we're actually going to look at all the criteria. Does your child meet all the criteria for regional center eligibility? And if yes, great, your child's eligible and will be eligible for life. If not, well, it looks like the regional center is that's it for the regional center services, and otherwise you'll just have to go to the school district or other agencies to get the services that your child needs. So that's just a breakdown of just kind of like that whole inner overlap with the early start versus actual full-time regional center eligibility for services. And I'm hoping that this really helps just to clear up that understanding. And by the way, I have like a whole presentation just on regional center eligibility. So like that's what I meant about like that being a separate process. I can spend a whole nother hour talking about just the criteria for regional center eligibility. If you want a quick 1-sentence summary, it's if you have a substantial developmental disability. Although as you will learn, substantial developmental disability has itself comes with a bunch of conditions that you're going to have to consider if you're applying for regional center eligibility. So just giving you a heads up, in addition to the whole early start process, we've got tons of great resources. And if you're looking ahead into regional center eligibility, we also got some great resources on that. And now that we've reached pretty much the end, I'm going to go through those resources that you can access through our website.
Emily, can I really quickly pop in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a couple of things on the previous slide. And this is where I think Emily, what she said about we could spend a whole 2 hours on regional center eligibility and picking, like kind of really understanding provisional eligibility. The same is true of that transition from what we call Part C to Part B services, and that is the special education eligibility portion. And certainly EFRC has whole trainings on just the IEP process. And certainly eligibility is a huge piece of that. And as a parent, I want to say that this is the part, like as your child is doing the countdown to age 3, this is when the softer side of things kind of starts to ease off. And you really have to, in my opinion, start to really pay a lot of attention to paperwork, to timelines, to calendars, to appointments, to really keep separate these two, this dual track of eligibility between regional center and also your local educational agency. And I think I'll let you keep going, Emily.
That's fine because I've reached the end. But I'm just going to go over quickly just our resources. Because we do have a lot of great information that can help break down the early start process as well as the regional center applications process. So in general, this is our website. That's the link. And if you want more, and actually, so information about early start is actually contained mostly in this manual, the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities. We call it SIR for short. And that entire manual, including the chapters, are available on our website, and it includes other languages like Spanish. And I can include the link, and there's the link there. And so the SIR manual, most of it talks about the school district's responsibility, but there's separate chapter or so that just talks about early start. So that's a great resource. So even though the SIR manual is more focused on school district, there is a lot of great information about the whole early start process and also the role of the regional center and the regional center service coordinators in that process. If you want to look more beyond into the regional center service realm, we have another manual called the Rights Under the Lanterman Act. Just a heads up, Lanterman Act is just the name of the law that created the regional center system. But it's called the RULA manual. And again, we actually recently updated it, including adding the information about provisional eligibility. There's actually been a lot of changes to the Lanterman Act. So that's why we're like, okay, we got to update our chapters here. So all that updated information is available on our website, chapter by chapter, and it also includes a Spanish version. And so this is just information on this regional center and early intervention, but we've got tons of pubs on practically everything disability related on our website. So we are more than happy to share that information with you. If you need it in a specific language and it's not available on our website, just reach out to us and request it, and we'll do our best to get it translated and to you so that it is that information is accessible. Okay, sorry, that was the real end of the presentation. So I just want to end off with the intake line. So the intake line, if you have a specific concern or question as it relates to a area of disability, including like if it's early start or regional center or even school district, you can call our intake line. And usually the intake staff themselves, they themselves are very knowledgeable and can answer your questions or refer you to the appropriate resource. But in addition to that, they also can refer a specific service request or issue to one of our practice groups. And I mentioned before, I'm in the IDD practice group, but we've got practice groups from the legal advocacy unit on a whole range of disability related service needs. So we have on civil rights, we've got one on youth/special education. We have one on mental health. So that is something where that's how we get cases and make a determination of what type of advocacy and what level of advocacy we provide. I know that that's how I have been able to connect with clients and provide a range of legal services, from full-on representation at a fair hearing to drafting a complaint to being at an IPP meeting, or if it's one of the youth attorneys in the IEP meeting. So but it can, we are a nonprofit, so it also depends on our resources and our availability. But just letting you know that it is a resource that we provide free of charge. And another great resource, this is more for regional center, but I think they also have great information on Early Start, is the Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy. So just a heads up that the Office of Clients' Rights, each regional center has their own clients' rights advocate. And like their name suggests, it is an advocate for the for families of those who are eligible for regional center services, although I think there's Early Start too. And they are, while they are a separate unit from the legal advocacy unit at DRC, they are, a lot of their advocacy and legal support overlaps. So, and in fact, we actually even coordinate. So I've actually been like reached out to by a member by OCRA of like, oh, we have this person who has this issue. Can you help or represent this person? So just letting you know that there is that overlap, even though we are technically separate, and we do work together from time to time, and letting you know that it is a resource you can also reach out to. And then last one, there was the contact. And then last one is my name. And and ending off with the EFRC.
And just to give a quick overview of our services that pertain to Early Start and beyond, we, as I said, Joe and I offer a lot of IEP workshops on various topics, including, understanding your procedural safeguards to having meaningful parent participation in the IEP process. But when we also offer IEP office hours and also regional center office hours, where if you want to come and just get ideas, better understand the IFSP and IPP, which is for 3 and up, once eligible, which is the individual program plan. You can drop into office hours. They're held twice a month, once at the noon lunch hour and another time from 8 to 9, so that families can get kiddos to bed and then be able to, kind of take an hour and brush up on questions. We also take individual appointments. So really, we're here to support families and to kind of walk along with you, help you identify resources when things are, beyond just a parent-to-parent support. And I want to kind of close out by just thanking Raymond, thanking Leilani, thanking Emily so much for coming out on a Saturday morning in the middle of a 3-day weekend to support our local Family Empowerment Center. And I wanted to also thank Mario Garcia, who is our interpreter, Spanish language interpreter. Thank you, Mario. And also my colleague Joe, who isn't on camera yet, but I'm sure will be soon.